Well, today we're able to have a little time with one of my favorite people to talk to over the many years that I've covered a variety of different news stories. His name is Gordon Chang. He's a writer, analyst, author, commentator with a specific expertise in China and North Korea, although we've talked about a host of different news stories over the year. Gordon, it's great to see you as always. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jenna.
Uh, for those that may be new to you, because our audience has grown quite a bit, thankfully, over the last year or so. I know we've had a period of different conversations throughout the lifetime of Smarter News, and you're always so generous. Can you give people a little bit about your background, Gordon, about how you got into this line of work and how you started to really research, learn more about what's happening in Asia and connecting the dots to what's also happening in the Western world, specifically America?
That's a hard question.
I like to start with the hard stuff, Gordon,
Yeah,
as you know.
I was practicing law in New York, made my way to Hong Kong in the beginning of the 1980s, stayed there for a decade, met my wife, brought her to San Diego for 5 years. And then in 1996, we moved to China. And this was a very optimistic time. And I can remember Lydia getting on the phone and saying, Mom, China's not communist anymore. And I certainly agreed with her because this was a time where China was opening up. They were wanted to become part of the world, and it was just exciting. And I remember my clients buzzing into Shanghai, staying at the Grand Hyatt, which is one of the most spectacular hotels in the world, and saying, China's not communist anymore. Uh, but as Lydia and I lived there, traveled around the country, worked, talked to people, we saw that the country had changed a lot less than everybody had assumed. And so I wrote a book called The Coming Collapse in China because I thought that the regime was a lot weaker. Now, I certainly got my timing wrong, but today we see a China which has got some really structural problems that it cannot solve. It hasn't solved them for the time that I started. So right now, China looks to many people to be so strong, but it's actually quite weak. And it's very, very dangerous because I think its leaders are starting to see a closing window of opportunity.
Interesting. I want to talk to you about that. And I want to give our audience a little bit of a background of how I reached out to you a few weeks ago because the world is changing so quickly. I reached out to you in a completely different news environment. It was just after our unprecedented operation in Venezuela that America went in, extracts the de facto president of Venezuela, brings him back to the United States. We think this is going to be the big news story of 2026. And we were wrong. We were definitely wrong. Then a few weeks later, the New York Times came out with a article that was talking about the disappearing generals within China's military, saying that, these high-ranking military officials over the years have just gone missing. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. At this time, I started thinking, it would be really good to reach out to Gordon because we continue to hear Venezuela had a relationship with China, and then we have this story coming about the military, and so maybe it's a good time to check back in with Gordon. And then we have this ongoing war with Iran that just recently started, and again we will hear, well, Iran has this relationship with China, and there's the oil involved, but we don't really get in depth. So we have a lot of stories that intersect with China, but no one's spending any time on it. And so even better that maybe we're talking now. It always works out. So why don't we pick apart these stories sort of one by one, Gordon, and then we're going to kind of move towards previewing what could be a really monumental moment of President Trump meeting face to face with President Xi in a few weeks. And so we have to know that that's always been on the horizon. That was announced last year that this could take place. So then we have to wonder, how are we going to place all these stories thinking of that in mind? So why don't we just start with Venezuela? What was the nature of China's relationship with Venezuela over the years, specifically the Maduro regime?
Maduro regime and the Chavez regime before it were supported by China. So China was taking about 90% of Venezuela's exports of crude. And this was important for China because it had previously lent something on the order of $62 billion or so to the Venezuelan regime, which had no way of paying it back except for providing oil on a discounted basis, which is what it's doing. China has worked that debt down, and we don't know exactly what it is, but people talk about 15 billion, maybe as little as 12 billion. But clearly, the Chinese had infiltrated themselves into Venezuelan society. So you had Chinese military officers there, Chinese military facilities, and the relationship between Caracas and Beijing was very tight. And so the Venezuelans wouldn't have called themselves a Chinese proxy, but the Chinese certainly looked at them in that way. And in many ways, the Chinese assessment was correct. And by the way, that's the same thing about Iran. The Iranians certainly don't see themselves as proxies to anybody, but the Chinese know that the Iranian regime couldn't survive without China's support. And you can pretty much say the same thing about Venezuela.
Now that there's a change in leadership in Venezuela, how has that impacted China?
Well, China has lost its relationship. So, yes, President Trump said Venezuela can sell oil to China. But the problem for China is that it's not going to get oil on a discounted basis, and it's going to have to pay in hard currency. So that's not something that the Chinese are happy with. And of course, with the new president there, Trump just said to her, from all the reports, that she has to cut her relationships with the Chinese. So China has lost its most important outpost in Latin America. And by the way, it's going to lose Cuba as well because Cuba depended on cheap Venezuelan crude, and it's now losing its proxy in Iran. So China is pretty much on the defensive throughout the world because President Trump has made it a priority to assert American power. And as a byproduct of that, maybe as a goal of that, though only President Trump can tell us what his goals are, but certainly as a byproduct of that, China is being removed from all of these countries where it once had great influence and power.
I'm very curious to talk to you a little bit more in depth about that. Can we just briefly stay with Iran for a moment? Because we've been talking a lot about the oil flowing in and out of the Strait of Hormuz and what that waterway means for the global economy. But I just heard someone speak about this today saying, yes, when we say that, that's true. But really, the majority of that oil is actually heading to China. It's not, it is about the global oil economy overall, but we should be more specific about where it's going. Can you provide any insight about just how much oil is flowing from Iran to China and the nature of that relationship?
Yeah, last year, China took 87.2% of Iran's exports of crude oil. Um, Year in, year out, it's hovering about 90%. Now, China gets, and that's depending on who you talk to, that's about 15% of China's imports of crude oil, though it could be higher. I've heard numbers higher, and those higher numbers do make a little bit of sense. But we do know that in general, not only that it's China's taking Iran's exports, it's taking exports from other countries in the Gulf. And when you put all that together, somewhere between 45 to 50% of China's imports of crude pass through the Strait of Hormuz. So this is an important issue for China. Now, China can do a couple things. It can take oil out of its strategic reserve, which is somewhere between 900 million to 1.2 billion barrels of oil. That's somewhere between 100 and 140 days of import cover. And it can buy more oil from Russia. But Russians are going to jack up the price and demand hard currency. So this is going to be a shock to an already fragile Chinese economy.
Do you have any insight as to the immediate impact on China's economy because of this attack that US and Israel has levied on Iran?
First few days after the attack on the 28th of last month, the gasoline prices in China spiked something like 11.0%. More important for the Chinese economy, diesel prices soared 13.5%. Now, that's probably a little bit, those prices are probably higher now. I'm sure the regime has moved to cap prices, but that causes dislocations, of course. So China has a big stake in making sure that the strait is opened up again.
China has the largest communist country in the world. It has the largest communist government in the world, and I'm curious what this means for those in power. Is there a panic, Gordon? It's my understanding that there's a large meeting taking place. Is it this week of those that are part of the Communist Party, the highest ranking officials. And it's sort of like I don't want to say State of the Union, but in some cases, it's sort of a planning session for them. You probably can describe it better than I can. What is the reaction from the elite and those in power? Is there a panic or a concern about the way forward, considering what's happening with Venezuela and Iran?
Jinping never shows panic, but I'm sure that he is not very happy right now and very insecure. You are referring to what the Chinese call the two sessions. That is the annual meeting of the National People's Congress, which is the legislature of the Chinese central government, and it's also the annual meeting of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, which is an advisory body. And they are held concurrently, and they started in the first week of this month. They're just about over. And so that's why they call them the two sessions. In a sense, the National People's Congress, which is the more important of the two meetings, it's a rubber stamp legislature. And so the decisions were made by the Communist Party, and then the NPC, as it's called, just sort of ratified them. But every once in a while, the NPC delegates get upset, and we see the discontent in Chinese society. Right now, people I think, are very, very terrified of Xi Jinping, so we don't see very much in the way of unhappiness. But we do know that throughout Chinese society, the Chinese people are angry and depressed, and they are withdrawing from Chinese society. As Chinese scholars call it, this is the garbage time of history. That is they talk about events 200 years ago, but they're really referring to today, because they can't directly come out and say Xi Jinping is driving our country into the ditch. But Xi Jinping is driving the country into the ditch, and people will express discontent in oblique ways, and they'll try and push it to as far as they can.
Why is there so much fear of President Xi?
Xi Jinping has been a very different leader. He's like, this requires a little bit of context. Mao Zedong, the founder of the People's Republic, he was supposed to have a consensual form of government, but he grabbed power from everybody else and nearly destroyed the country twice. During the Great Leap Forward, which began at the end of the 1950s, and during the Cultural Revolution, a decade-long campaign that started in 1966. Deng Xiaoping, his predecessor, tried to normalize the Communist Party, to bring it back to some sort of semblance that the rest of the world could understand. And he was largely successful in institutionalizing succession. So you had a series of leaders: Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao. Get the Hu Jintao, very consensus-driven system, but people felt China was drifting. And so Xi Jinping, they picked him to be the next leader. And he has been a leader in the form of Mao, going back and deinstitutionalizing the Communist Party. So just to give you two examples, Xi Jinping inherited a consensual political system, which means no leader got too much credit or too much blame. But Xi, by taking power from everybody else, has sort of accumulated uh, almost near total accountability, nobody else to blame. And so he knows he's in trouble, because the other thing that he did was he raised the cost of losing political struggles, which means now he's being blamed for everything, and he knows he can lose everything. So he has been ruthlessly purging both civilians and military officers, and people are afraid for their lives because they know that they will be jailed if they speak out. And Xi Jinping has been very, very relentless. He's the Mao. Nobody wants this, but he's there.
That may bring us to these articles, a series of articles in the New York Times, and this story has been covered elsewhere as well, about the quote unquote disappearing generals. As I mentioned, these high-ranking officials that seem to mysteriously disappear. I'm going to read a little bit from the New York Times here. This is a quote: "These men are among dozens of once rising senior military officers who have been detained, dismissed, or simply disappeared from view without explanation over the last 4 years." It goes on to write, "The purge has stripped the military of its most experienced commanders and raised doubts about its readiness to go to war, including over Taiwan, which Beijing claims as its territory." Let's stop there, because that's taking us a couple steps. First of all, what's going on? Where detained, dismissed, or simply disappeared? Why,
Yes.
Gordon?
Just to give you an example of how serious this is, On January 24th, the Ministry of National Defense announced the investigation of two officers. One of them was China's most senior uniformed officer, General Zhang Yaoshao, who was also the first vice chairman of the Communist Party's Central Military Commission. The Communist Party Central Military Commission controls the military. It had 7 members on it. It now has 2. It has Xi Jinping, who is not a military officer, and it has a political commissar. There are no operational officers on the Central Military Commission, which means the chain of command of the military has been severed. It's been severed for the first time in the history of the People's Republic. So you have basically Xi Jinping just purging general and admiral, one right after the other, for more than a decade, and it has completely disabled the Chinese military. Well, I shouldn't say completely, but it has made it to the point where it can't, for instance, launch hostilities by invading the main island of Taiwan because there's just nobody there to implement those orders.
Why would President Xi want to do that? Why not? I mean, okay, you agree with someone, you don't think they're following the same philosophy as you, you can move them out, but then you can move somebody else in. So what's going on?
Great question, to which there is no answer. A couple things. We know that Xi Jinping wants loyalty, and he's made that the primary test of promotion. And so people say that because Xi Jinping got rid of General Zhang Yaoshao, for instance, that he has complete control of the Chinese military. Well, no, he doesn't, because if he did, he wouldn't have to keep on purging people, because people are showing disobedience or in some way angering Xi Jinping, which means he doesn't control the military, because it just keeps on getting out beyond his control. This is important because it's not just a question of loyalty. There are rumors, and this is the part where we just do not know. But there have been rumors of attempted coups inside China. Now, I tend to think that they are not true, but they are persistent, which means that at the very minimum, people are trying to destabilize Xi Jinping. So we know that there is discord at the top of the Chinese military. And by the way, there's also discord at the top of the civilian leadership of the Communist Party as well. So this is a regime that is in turmoil. And so Xi Jinping, I guess the answer to your question, why is he doing this? Because he demands loyalty and he thinks it's more important than anything else, including having a capable military. Because China's military, its pilots are still as good as they were 2 months ago. Its ship drivers, they're still as good as they were, but they're not. There's no command. There's no command structure left.
What do you think this means for America?
Couple things. First of all, it means we can do what we want for at least a little while, because we know that the Chinese are not in a position to challenge us. That was also, we sort of knew that even before the most recent purges. It also means Taiwan is safe from certain threats. As I mentioned, it is unlikely, really unlikely, that China will launch hostilities with an invasion of the main island of Taiwan. The reason is, to do that, that's a combined air, land, sea operation, something that China has never done in its history. And to do that, Xi Jinping would have to give some flag officer, some general or admiral, almost complete control over the Chinese military. Even in his most secure days, Xi Jinping wouldn't want to do that because that makes that flag officer the most powerful figure in China. And China and the Chinese civilian leaders do not trust the military, and they haven't since basically 3 decades. So Xi Jinping isn't going to do that. But that's not to say Taiwan is safe, because there are certain islands of Taiwan that are like 3 miles off the Chinese coast. China, even with its weakened state, can grab those islands, and Xi Jinping has an incentive to do that. The more important reason why we're at risk, and I think the risk of war is high, is because Xi Jinping, I believe, thinks that it's in his interest to maintain a high degree of tension. And because of that, we see very provocative Chinese military activities from India in the south to South Korea in the north. The most provocative are those against the Philippines in the South China Sea, at places like Scarborough Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal. If any one of those incidents spirals out of control, I don't think Xi Jinping can de-escalate. I don't think he can act constructively. And I think that that is a trigger for a wider war. Now, that wider war is going to involve us. Philippines, we have an obligation to defend them. We have a treaty. We have a treaty to defend Japan. We have a treaty to defend South Korea. And we have a moral obligation and a lot of practical reasons to defend Taiwan. So we get involved, our allies get involved, our friends get involved, and on the other side, the Chinese bring in the Russians and the North Koreans. So this could be one really big dust-up.
Can you describe the provocative actions that you mentioned? Is it through air, someone flying a little bit too close to certain airspace? Is it ships that are moving too close to certain areas? What is the provocative action that the Chinese military is taking?
Those. So, for instance, we see the Chinese ramming Philippine craft at Scarborough Shoal. And about 3-4 months ago, the Chinese Coast Guard and the Chinese Navy were chasing the Philippine Coast Guard. And the Chinese seamanship, a Chinese destroyer, sliced off the bow of a Chinese Coast Guard cutter as they were pursuing a very clever and very nimble captain of the Philippine Coast Guard. At least 4 Coast Guardmen, Chinese Coast Guardmen, were killed, maybe more. And it just shows you that the Chinese military and the Chinese Coast Guard, although they look formidable and they've got great boats and ships, their seamanship, not very good.
Yeah.
So now the Chinese were furious at the Filipinos for this, though they should have been furious at themselves. The Chinese then ramped up their provocative activities at Scarborough. And so you have all sorts of things. But you also have unsafe aerial intercepts. So it's like all of the above. And we have made it a point to de-escalate when we can. And we did, for instance, in 2001, April 1st, when the Chinese fighter clipped the wing of our Navy EP-3. The Chinese fighter dumped into the sea and the pilot was lost. Our plane landed in Hainan. The Chinese stripped that plane. They imprisoned the crew. They demanded a ransom. George W. Bush, to his internal, this was a disgraceful episode in American history. We offered to pay a ransom to get our people back. We allowed the Chinese to take that plane apart and keep the most important parts of it. But we de-escalated because we did not want a crisis. But what we did was we taught the Chinese that belligerent actions work, and China has been provocative since then. And it's not just a Republican failure. It's President Obama basically let the Chinese take Scarborough Shoal in early 2012. And we have incidents about every couple months at Scarborough Shoal. Again, Obama, wanting to de-escalate, taught the Chinese that they can get away with murder, figuratively at least. And so we saw the Chinese right after Scarborough, which was a long story. Right after that, they ramped up pressure on Second Thomas Shoal, another Philippine feature. They started militarizing the islands in the South China Sea, and they ramped up their pressure in the East China Sea against Japan because we legitimized the most belligerent elements in Beijing. So we have had this really awful policy of opening the door to Chinese provocations.
Well, it makes me think of the term red line, right? We've heard that term from, as you mentioned, it's not Democrats or Republicans. It's a variety of administrations that will say, this is where we're drawing the line, and anything that extends over this, then you better watch out. It's something that President Trump has talked about in the latest operation with Iran of saying, we told them there's a red line. They've passed it. We don't like what's happening. And so we're going to make sure that this doesn't happen for another 40 years. I'm obviously paraphrasing him as he was talking about the Islamic Republic, the current leadership in Iran. Do you think there's and I know this is really just a question that, as you mentioned, Gordon, unless we're talking to President Trump and Secretary Rubio and behind closed doors, maybe get some insight. That I'm just kind of relying on your opinion here of how much do you think the strategy with China has been a part of the decision making when it comes to Venezuela and Iran and even Cuba?
It's a really important part. And we can see that because of a couple things. So, for instance, after we extracted Maduro and his wife, Trump told the acting Venezuelan president, Delcy Rodriguez, you have to sever your relations, your economic relations with China. Um, Now, we extracted Maduro for maybe other reasons, but was a big byproduct of that. And as I mentioned, you know, China's not getting discounted oil from Venezuela anymore. So I think that there's been a real attempt to do this. Look at Panama, where we have worked very hard to remove the Chinese from the canal zone. And we've been very explicit about that, both
Hmm.
Trump and Rubio. So it's clear that that is an important consideration. And of course, with Iran, with Chinese influence there. So, um, you know, whatever the motivation is, we can see what happens afterwards. And we can see that China has been the biggest loser from these military actions on the part of the United States.
I want to ask you about something you actually shared on your X feed, and I'll make sure that the ways to follow you, Gordon, are a part of our show notes as well. Uh, so there's two sort of different pictures that we're getting of China. One is of a leader that's centralizing his power, that is trying to gain strength that way, but could be less stable, right? And then we're also getting another picture of kind of chaos within the government that also could be less stable, and lack of stability can be very dangerous. It's not it's when there is a question, if someone feels whether it's a person or a country insecure, it's when we can start seeing behavior that can actually be dangerous. At the same time, we've also talked a lot about China over the last year when it comes to tariffs and trade. And you mentioned that President Xi is driving China into a ditch. But then I saw that you shared an article from CNBC that just came out about how China's exports are great. Everything their economy is doing wonderful. How are we supposed to look at these different pieces of news? What do you see when you see a headline like that saying, well, despite all these things, China's still exporting, like a machine and doing just fine.
China had about $1.2 trillion of export surplus last year, which is a historical record. That was on top of the 992 million the year before, and China is now outpacing that. But that's really a sign of weakness of the Chinese economy. And the reason is the Chinese are exporting so much because they have to. They have to because domestic demand is eroding fast. And we see this. Uh, Xi Jinping believes that, well, let me go back. Almost every economist in the world says that China needs to develop a consumption based economy to be sustainable. Xi Jinping abhors consumption for a lot of political internal reasons. He has emphasized manufacturing. China manufactures much more than the Chinese people can buy. So there's deflation. Deflation is an economy killer. The only way he can get out of this is export more. So they're increasing their predatory practices. And so they've been able to export more. But I think that that is temporary, largely because countries are starting to resist. The United States is resisting, Europe is resisting, other countries, as even in the global south, like Brazil, are resisting because they don't want the Chinese to take over 100% of their country. So that's a sign of weakness. It does look strength, but it is a sign of weakness. But on the general issue you started out with about Xi Jinping on power, the reason why I think there's instability in China right now is because Xi Jinping had, in general, when I mentioned Deng Xiaoping trying to institutionalize the Communist Party succession, and the idea was that everybody got 2 5-year terms at the top. Now, Xi Jinping took a third 5-year term in 2022. And right after that, we started to see signs of dissension and discord at the top of the party. And the reason is by taking a third term, he denied every Chinese leader, every Chinese official a promotion upwards. Because, if he were to move out of the way, there'd be a new general secretary. With the new general secretary, there's a new Politburo standing committee, and a new Politburo, and a new central committee, and everybody gets pushed up. Well, Xi Jinping stopped that process by taking the third term, and then people started to oppose Xi. Now, many ways, they can't oppose him openly, but when they get the chance, They undermine him. And that's why I think we're seeing this discord at the top of the party. And it's a symptom of Xi Jinping grabbing power from everybody else.
So what do you think about this meeting? We don't have a date yet, official date yet announced in the meeting between President Trump and President Xi. We widely expect in the next few weeks, but as we mentioned, it's been kind of an erratic news cycle. So who knows exactly what's going to take place and when. What do we want from this meeting, Gordon? Like what do you think of President Trump traveling to China to meet with President Xi? What do you think of the message that it's sending to the world? And ultimately, what does America want from this relationship in an ideal situation?
We want China to be, just sort of like the Netherlands or Norway.
I can't even
Um,
imagine that.
I can't imagine
Yeah.
that.
But
On
a friendly, quiet ally is what I think you're saying. Strategic
Yeah,
at times, but
we
also
a country
fine.
we can trade with and
Yeah.
not disrupt the world. Um, but it's not going to be Luxembourg. Uh, we've announced dates. We said that this meeting is going to take 3 days. It's going to start on March 31st, and Trump is only going to Beijing. The Chinese, by the way, have not confirmed the meeting. They have not confirmed the dates, which, yes, they're negotiating with American officials on the details of this. But you got to remember, Trump wants to go. Trump wants to
Why?
pump.
Why do we want to go now? I mean, there's a lot going on. Maybe we could just maybe cut down some of the travel costs at the time. Like, why is it important to do now?
I think he should not go.
Hmm.
Now, there are a lot of this. I'm not as apoplectic about it as I was a couple weeks ago, but shouldn't go. The reason he should, well, there are now additional reasons he shouldn't go. First of all, the most important thing is Trump is going to the Chinese capital, and he's going first. And the Chinese are going to look at this like the vassal going to the Grand Celestial Court.
Mhm.
And Trump doesn't think he's a vassal. Trump doesn't think he is showing his submission to China. But what Trump thinks does not matter. What matters is what the Chinese think. And that matters because that's the way it's going to determine how they're going to act. And they're going to be more aggressive and all the rest of it. Now, I'm a little less apoplectic about it because if you go back to last year when people were talking about this, the Chinese were really pushing Trump around on a lot of stuff. Now, the shoe's on the other foot. Trump is pushing these guys around. Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, Panama, you name it. So I think that Trump has seized the initiative from the Chinese. And so I'm not sure exactly that the Chinese want Trump there. Remember, Trump
Hmm.
has sort of beat them, out of these guys. So why
Thank you
would they?
there could be children around, Gordon, so thank you in our sensitive ears. But yes, I
Right.
understand what you're saying.
I wasn't going to use the S word. I was going to use the C word. But anyway, he's he's taking the stuffing out of these guys, and they do not want a triumphant Trump who is unpredictable, who is uncontrollable in their capital, making them look bad. So it's not entirely clear to me that the Chinese will have this meeting, at least at this time. The poly market, the people bet
Yes.
on poly market thinks that the meeting will occur, but it's a lot less lopsided than it once was. The thing, though, that I'm concerned about is that China effectively is an enemy combatant in Iran. Iran's
Mm.
using Chinese weapons and firing them at us. And I'm sure the 7 Americans who were killed, they were killed in part because there were Chinese components in those drones. I don't think Trump should go at a time like this. As I said, I don't think he should go full stop, but especially at a time like this. Even if he can go there and diss them in their own capital, I just think that it's wrong at this time.
Interesting. That'll be definitely a story to watch because, as I mentioned, it's been talked about for a while. And it was something that President Trump and his team have kind of this is what's going to happen. As you know, President Trump talks about he just even discussed a call just this week with President Putin, for example. Oh, yeah, we had a really nice call. Yeah, yeah, and you don't really know exactly what took place or what he's calling nice or how the Russians would feel about that. But you're bringing up some really interesting points here about how timing could be could be a factor and a question about the wisdom of that timing. In You mentioned a kind of an ideal world of China being like the Netherlands. I'm just thinking about China being such a large economy, and I'm thinking about all the different ways that our economy is already changing because of artificial intelligence. There's a lot of fear attached to that as well. The American public has widely been told, just generally, that China is more sophisticated when it comes to certain technologies, that they're investing in their military in ways that we're not. And I think there is a little bit of a fear, speaking just from the reporting that we've done over the years, of what could happen if there was a conflict with China. Uh, do you think the precedent set with Venezuela and Iran has made conflict less likely with China or more likely with China, considering the environment?
Most likely, because the Chinese see that there's an American president willing to use force. And so I think the Chinese, they didn't like Trump before. Um, and the reason is that um, Trump was just very different. They can deal with hostile presidents, American presidents, and they can deal with friendly ones. What they can't deal with are unpredictable ones. And Trump can be unpredictable. So I don't think um, I don't think they want him there. And if we go back to 2020, we can see China tipped the scales for Joe Biden over Bernie Sanders in the Democratic Party in the primaries, and they tipped the balance toward Biden in the general election. So we can see how they act.
How so, Gordon? How did they do that?
Well, in the Democratic primaries, there was a lot of propaganda that they issued. In the general election, it was full spectrum. So, for instance, Act Blue, which is the Democratic Party website for small contributions, the Chinese funneled a lot of money from foreign sources through Act Blue. Um, and there was the text messages that China tried to destabilize President Trump. So, for instance, the Stafford Act, they sent out the text messages saying the president was going to invoke his powers under the Stafford Act and basically rule like a dictator. Well,
Mhm.
Trump had no intention of using the Stafford Act. So we know TikTok was disrupting the Chinese were using TikTok to disrupt his rallies. It just was across the board. And it was, of course, a lot of propaganda. They used what was then Twitter, Facebook, and they were flooding them with propaganda. So it was text messages, social media, all the rest of it. You remember, and they were very effective at it. Remember, if you go back to January and February of 2020, everyone was saying Trump was going to get reelected.
Sure.
Um, and of course, that did not happen. And I think that China tipped the scales with a very effective campaign against the president.
And we also had the pandemic as well, which was a factor in that all its own.
Yes, and the Chinese made sure we don't know how COVID-19 started. I think it was a lab leak, but we do know, Jenna, 100% that once this disease got into central China, that China took steps to deliberately spread it beyond its borders. And that changed the political calculus in the United States dramatically.
It certainly impacted world history, one event like that, and it was I know an experience that we're still processing, and there's still residue from that period that's affecting society and certainly the political environment as well. Speaking of labs, I want to. There's a couple stories I just want to hit with you briefly, Gordon, before we go. That are ones that I just that are not necessarily in the top of national news, but definitely have piqued my curiosity. One is a story that was out of Las Vegas earlier this year, and it was a story I couldn't really understand. There was a lab that, the FBI was raiding or law enforcement was looking at, and it was tied to a lab in California, apparently, with Chinese nationals. I'm just gonna stop there if I can, 'cause it's a little bit convoluted. But it raised the question about Chinese spies, about the Communist Party being active on American soil. And certainly there's a sensitivity because of COVID-19 and any sort of lab work or disease, which also was sort of wrapped into the reporting on this of research or treatments or tests. What can you tell us about this?
You're talking about January 31st of this year. Las Vegas SWAT and federal agents raided a home in Las Vegas. They found more than 1,000 vials of a substance or substances that were causing people in that home to be deathly ill, according to the housekeeper. This home is owned through a shell company by a Chinese national who goes on trial on federal charges next month. That Chinese national was operating a um, biological weapons lab in Reedley, California, that was discovered in December of 2022. Inside, they found at least 20 pathogens, including ones for Ebola. And they also found almost 1,000 mice that have been genetically engineered to spread disease. So this is evidence that China plans a mass casualty attack with a weapon of mass destruction, because there were no explanations that could explain what was going on other than an attack on the U.S. There's got to be a third facility, and the reason I believe that is because in Las Vegas, they found that red substance that didn't come from the Reedley lab, which was uncovered 2022. So we're talking 4 years. Where that red substance came from, we don't know, but it didn't come from Reedley, which means there's got to be at least a third Chinese biological weapons facility in the United States, most likely a laboratory, not a storage house. The one in Las Vegas was a storage house. Um,
Is there any doubt in your mind that this is connected to the Communist Party?
no, and the reason is that, for instance, the Las Vegas home was being monitored by a woman who had fled the U.S., was the lover of the owner of the Reedley lab and the Las Vegas home. She was in China monitoring the Las Vegas home through the internet. China has the world's most sophisticated set of internet controls. If they didn't know, it was because they didn't want to know. And also, the guy who was owning both of these facilities, he has connections with the Communist Party, and a number of different connections. Yeah, they in a total surveillance state, they know what's going on.
Gordon, this is a crazy story. Like when I saw this, just I don't even know how I saw this story. I can't, I'm on a lot of different sites a lot of time trying to do research. And again, this was one of the reasons I reached out to you because I was like, what in the world? And also, why isn't this a bigger news story? This is that what you just described is every American would want to know that that's happening in their neighborhood or perhaps a threat. But why doesn't it get more coverage? I, I'm kind of flabbergasted.
Yeah, and this is not an isolated story because we know that Chinese researchers were bringing in genetically modified pathogens that could have affected U.S. agriculture. A fungus and a roundworm. These were the University of Michigan people who were discovered in June and November of last year. Plus, this is also in connection with those stories about Chinese parties sending in seeds and liquids into the United States unsolicited, which is, I think, an attempt to plant invasive species here, another attack on U.S. agriculture. So there's, one story is maybe a coincidence, but not all of these stories together.
That's a story that we did cover at Samara News. Random seed packets showing up at people's homes. No one knows what they are. They didn't order them, but they're now in their house, and was a very bizarre event. Are we doing the same thing to China, Gordon? Do we have folks doing anything like that to them, or is this
No.
just kind of a one-sided thing?
One-sided thing. We don't do that.
And China just wants to what? Overthrow the United States, cause mass harm and economic
Prohibition?
disruption? Like what are they trying to do?
Well, the general question is they're trying to take down the United States. Xi Jinping believes in the notion of Tianxia, or all under heaven. The Chinese emperors not only had the right to rule all under heaven, but they were compelled by heaven to do so. So that means they do not see the United States as a legitimate state. In addition, they view us as an existential threat, and they view us as an existential threat not because of anything that we say or do, but because of who we are. You have an insecure regime in Beijing is worried about the inspirational impact of America's values and form of governance on the Chinese people. So they believe that they have to destroy our country. It's not any more complicated than that.
Yeah, sometimes he just needs to say it simply, so, it gives us a lot to think about, the simple things like that. Uh, just has when you're talking about destroying the country, this was the other, story I would just wanted to briefly get you on the record for, about fentanyl, because the administration has said they've had some agreements with China and, that really the fentanyl that has been coming into the United States was primarily from China. Uh, what about that quote unquote business, Gordon? Has that been depleted? Has there been some good agreement? Is that a farce? What do you make of any of that conversation?
We won't know until we see the number of fentanyl deaths for the year. I assume that they are way down because the southern border is closed. And that was the primary way of getting fentanyl into the U.S. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if they're bringing fentanyl in from the northern border. Matter of fact, the world's largest fentanyl lab was discovered not in China, not in Mexico, but it was discovered in Vancouver. But it's not just fentanyl, it is also the netazines. China uses drugs to destroy societies on its periphery. So, for instance, Chinese producers are flooding Southeast Asia with methamphetamines. So it's not just fentanyl, it's all part of a coordinated plan. And we know that this is not just Chinese criminals. First of all, in a total surveillance state, you can't have large organized criminal gangs that operate without the knowledge and approval of the Communist Party. But we know that the party has been supplying, subsidies for the fentanyl producers. Some of the fentanyl producers are state-owned. Chinese diplomats give cover to the gangs. Every container that leaves China is inspected by Chinese officials. The fentanyl producers, they launder their proceeds through the Chinese state banking system. Chinese TikTok promoted illicit drug use in the U.S. This was a project on the part of the Chinese to destroy American youth. Now, the other question you asked is this going to be good? I hope so. We know that Xi Jinping promised to stop the fentanyl trade to Obama in 2016, to Trump in 2018, and to Biden in 2023. Those were three prior promises. We now got a fourth promise. And I think that the difference this time is that Trump's just not taking it anymore because they disrespected him with violating that 2018 promise to him. So closing the southern border has a lot to do with it. We're now more concerned about China, so we're actually paying more attention. So I hope things are going to go in the better direction.
You mentioned American youth and you've mentioned TikTok now with a couple stories. Because of the new business arrangement regarding TikTok, is TikTok any quote unquote safer for the America's youth?
It's safer, but maybe not safe enough. We know that we know that Oracle is going to handle the data, which means that the data will not be piped directly back to Beijing, which it was before. Now, the question is the algorithm. Before, China had 100% control of the algorithm, which they were using to, for instance, attack President Trump during the 2020 election campaign, but also to promote illicit drug use, promote suicide, all sorts of promote the Ukraine war on the Russian side, promote Hamas. Now that algorithm is going to be partly controlled by China and probably partly controlled by the American parties. How that works out, I don't know, but it's not satisfactory arrangement.
As we kind of close up here, again, one of the reasons I wanted to spend a little time on China and kind of zoom out of Iran, where there's a lot of focus for obvious reasons and good reasons, is that Iran isn't one of the top economies in the world. It doesn't have the reach that China does. It doesn't have the population that China does. And I could make that similar case for Russia as well. Russia's obviously different than China. But when we're really thinking about who are our major adversaries threatening the United States, reaching into American society and spreading propaganda or trying to get influence and leverage, the arguments are probably stronger for China and Russia than Venezuela and Iran. So that maybe leads us to a final question, but a complicated one, Gordon. Are we not prioritizing the right things based on our foreign policy? And what do you think are the chances, given the tension in the world right now, that this will create a condition where China and Russia have an even closer relationship? And that becomes one of the bigger stories of 2026.
Um, China and Russia are really close right now because Putin and Xi Jinping see the world in the same terms and they see the same objectives. And Putin is really, really important to Xi Jinping because Putin does things that Xi Jinping would like to do but doesn't want to do himself. In other words, invade other countries. They're pretty close. Now, a lot of people will tell you that China and Russia will never have an enduring partnership, and I accept that proposition, but I say it's completely irrelevant because I don't worry about China and Russia in the 2060s. I worry about these guys right now. And the other question you had is, no, we're not focusing on the right things. Xi Jinping talks about going to war all the time. We need the president of the United States to talk to the American people about how dangerous the situation is. We know the American people will make sacrifices, but they've got to understand what they're sacrificing for. And right now, we're being told we're in peace. So why should I, if you're an American citizen, you should be asking, well, why do I care? Why I should care because my gas price is up 13 cents or whatever. Because it's peacetime. It shouldn't happen. But if you believe that this is a war, if you believe that the Chinese are assaulting our country and that this is an existential fight, then yeah, I'm willing to pay 13 cents more for a gallon of gasoline. So it's important for President Trump to do what really he doesn't want to do, what Biden didn't want to do, what Obama didn't want to do, and what George W. Bush didn't want to do, and that is to have a realistic conversation with the American people about how dangerous this world is. The one thing about Trump, which is really great, is that his predecessors kicked a lot of cans down the road, including Iran. And Trump is saying, no, I'm not kicking the can down the road. I'm protecting the American people. That's a really important thing to do. And however things turn out, the American people owe him a big debt of gratitude for trying to protect him. But the president also needs to start to talk to the American people about how dangerous this world is.
How would
Let
you
me
do that, China? How would you describe that, Gordon? If you have just a few minutes to speak directly to our audience, how would you describe the world that we're in now and how China and why China matters to the American public?
The world is at one of the most dangerous periods in history. Um, Lenin said there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. And during these weeks, decades are happening. And it's very difficult for us to understand where we are. But we do know that there are large, hostile, evil states that are out there that want to destroy the United States, that are working actively to do it. And we need to understand that this is not peacetime, that we are in a war as the Chinese define it. They have the doctrine of unrestricted warfare, which is to use any tactics to take down the U.S. To put this in context, two Chinese Air Force colonels in 1999 wrote a slim book titled Unrestricted Warfare, where they advocated the use of any tactics, including terrorism, to hit the U.S. They specifically mentioned bin Laden hitting the U.S. This is 2 years before 9/11. This was at a time when China supported bin Laden. That shows you the ruthlessness and the determination of the Chinese regime. We need to understand that. We need to stop talking about China as a competitor. We even need to stop talking about China as an adversary. And we need to call the Chinese what they call us, which is an enemy. That's a hard message for the American people to take for a lot of reasons, but it's one that we have got to understand. One other point. We couldn't care about bin Laden even after he killed 6 Americans by bombing the North Tower of the World Trade Center in February 1993. We didn't care about him until one day when he killed 2,977 of our neighbors, our friends, our loved ones. And then we actually paid attention. China is much more powerful than Al Qaeda, and we're not paying attention to China.
Mm. It gives us a lot to think about, Gordon. It does. And it's a reminder, you put it so well with that expression from Lenin about how quickly things can change. How do you go about your daily life, Gordon, with these sort of thoughts, and thinking about I know you've been talking about this a long time and you've been pleading with a lot of people to pay attention to China because maybe, as you mentioned, your timeline was off for the coming collapse of China, but the collapse could be decades long. So maybe not. History is long, and sometimes we don't know how we're judged for many, many years. So how do you just go about your life, Gordon, without feeling the heaviness of all of this?
Feel the heaviness, but I believe that I was put on this earth to talk about these things, so I feel it's an obligation,
Mhm.
and I'll do what I do. So
Mhm. Well, we appreciate it. And every time we talk, I always learn something. It gives me something to think about, and that was part of the goal of this conversation is asking that question about priorities. Because the last thing I want as a journalist is that our audience is caught off guard by something that we never talked about but probably should have. And periodically we have these check-ins very intentionally because if you just look at the statistics, if you just look at the data, the story looks a little bit different than a narrative that can often be passed on through the media. And I'll take blame for that too sometimes because you're focused on the shiny thing in front of you. You have to. There's a breaking news story and you want to dig in, but then also you need to take a breath and look up and look out and not be captured by what people want you to talk about and think more strategically of like what actually matters to the audience. And ultimately, safety and security matter to our audience, and America matters to our audience too. It can't be said enough. So, all the more reason to spend a little time together, which I appreciate as always, Gordon. Thank you so much for spending some more time with us.
well, thank you, Jenna. And remember, Eisenhower on his desk had two inboxes, one which was urgent and the other one was marked important.
That sounds a lot like our inboxes right now, Gordon. I might add a couple others, but great to see you as always. And we can't wait to have you back again, Gordon. Thank you.